Okay, without further ado, let's get started. So welcome to our session, which today focuses on equality, diversity and inclusion. If anyone has any questions throughout the session, please do not hesitate to pose your question in the allocated box throughout. We will try our best to answer all the questions. Anything that you're considering that is a particular topic at that time, please just do it as it comes to mind. Or if you would prefer, you can leave it to the end. So let's start with a few introductions. I'm Stacey Mann. I am the Early Years and Childcare Subject Specialist here at NCFE. I am joined today by Kelly Johnson. Kelly, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you, Kelly. Kelly is our Provider Development Officer and a very knowledgeable colleague. And I work very closely with Kelly and the rest of the Provider Development team as a subject specialist for early years and childcare. But as we know, equality, diversity and inclusion does go all the way through our teaching and learning, regardless of what our subject is. So we will go through all of this today with a mindfulness of sensitivity of the subject. And what I would like you to do is note my email address and Kelly's email address on the screen for future reference and for any questions that may evolve and are not answered in today's session. So looking at what our intentions are today. Our intentions today are collaborative. We'll work towards them together to ensure that you get the best out of today's session. I ask you to have an open mind and to deeply reflect on this subject. Equality, diversity and inclusion is so important to our daily teaching practice, and so it should be something that we take time to deeply reflect on. With the limited time that we have to do that in our working day, this is a great opportunity to take advantage of. Equality, diversity and inclusion is so important for all of us. And so today we will be looking at fully embracing equality and diversity in the workplace and ensuring that it becomes part of our ethos and the culture of our teaching practice. But we also need to reflect on our own practice and consider all of the terms equality, diversity and inclusion, but what that looks like in action. According to government figures, ethnic minorities make up 13% of the UK population, and that's a figure from 2018, while around 13.3 million people have a reported disability, making up approximately 21% of the population, and those figures are from as far back as 2015 and 16. But inequalities persist. Disabled people are still more than twice as likely to be out of work than non-disabled people, according to the Labour Force survey, January to March 2018. While a white person is still 12% more likely to find work than a person from an ethnic minority, and that is as close as 2018. Sources suggest that around 1 in 5 of working age people in the UK reported a disability in 2019 to 2020, so a bit more up to date there. At school, the Social Mobility Commission reported in 2017 that gaps in attainment between pupils from high and low socioeconomic status backgrounds exist from the start of school, but widen rather than close over the course of education. So, throughout today's session, based on all of those shocking statistics, please ask yourself the reflective questions that pop up and be honest with yourself in your responses, because this will only positively influence your teaching practice. With that in mind, we're going to start with a poll. So that's something for you to deeply reflect on straight away on how confident you are with equality, diversity and inclusion. On a scale of 1 to 10. So 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest. How confident are you with your knowledge and understanding of equality, diversity and inclusion? And we ask you that so in the hope really that you travel a journey with us today. So we'll return to those poll results at the end to see if you have increased your confidence and your knowledge with equality, diversity and inclusion. So let's take a look at what EDI looks like in education. Every school, college or setting wants to ensure that all of their students succeed and achieve their full potential. Am I right? We are teaching our children and young people to become excellent citizens and to accept and cherish the diverse society in which we live by promoting knowledge of all elements of diversity, how to remove discrimination, promote equality of opportunity, and create good connections. So, how do we do this in practice? And please use the chat box to share with me. How do we do this in practice? How do we make sure that our children and young people are becoming excellent citizens? And how are we promoting them working together and living together? And also think about what can we do to ensure that this is something that is embedded within our practice? And by looking at those poll results right at the start, if confidence is quite low, then that's what today is all about. Let's be thinking all the way through about policies and procedures, about the learning environment, about our teaching practice, and about the lessons. And within that, what messages are we sending to the children and young people that we work with? And sometimes we might surprise ourselves. Sometimes we might be doing something that we do on a daily basis in our teaching and learning practice and not realise that we are not promoting best practice when it comes to equality, diversity and inclusion. And that's okay. It's okay to be wrong and it's okay to make mistakes. And I think that's something that we all need to help each other with, that it's okay not to get it right every single time. What's not okay is not learning from it. So we need to make sure that if we are making the mistakes, we're learning from those mistakes and changing our practice. And that's where being a reflective educator really comes into play. We really need to understand deeply how we evaluate our own practice, how we reflect on our own practice, and then most importantly, how that impacts our practice. So let's take a look at some legislation first of all. So beginning with legislation that underpins the policies and procedures of our workplace, the Equality Act from 2010 is a framework in which sets out details of how to ensure that individuals are protected in society. There are 9 characteristics which are protected by the Equality Act 2010. You are protected by law if you are discriminated against directly, indirectly, or by association in respect of any of these aspects. Does anybody know what those 9 characteristics are? If you can think of them, pop them into the chat box right now. The Equality Act of 2010 really brings together anti-discrimination laws and makes it easier to understand and uses positive action to increase diversity. The framework sets out protection from discrimination, harassment and victimisation and details the different ways it is unlawful to treat someone. So some of those aspects, some of those characteristics that some people have quite rightly commented are age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. And everybody on this call right now may have felt discriminated against directly or indirectly or by association with any of those 9 characteristics. And I think it's really, really important for us to recognise that somebody that we're talking to on a daily basis may have been affected in some way where that can be traumatic, and it can be an experience that they might bring to the classroom. So it's something that we really need to bear in mind. The great way to implement the understanding of these areas is to research the meaning behind them, along with examples to cement the learning and the impact. It's important to reflect on our own attitudes to equality as well, but a classroom idea might be that we, independently or in a small group, research the meanings of those terms, look at reasonable adjustments and indirect discrimination, and maybe they could prepare a presentation to share with their peer group, or they could use examples to describe how adults working in education and childcare promote equality for children and young people, but also to reflect on their own attitude to equality and how they can have a voice in that classroom. So some of the questions that I'd like you to ponder, and you can share your answers with me there, or you can just reflect deeply by yourselves, is: are there opportunities to share experiences and explore the concept of fairness, tolerance, and forgiveness throughout the day? Do you, as an educator, challenge negative attitudes? And do your policies and procedures reflect the legislation and your practice? And I just want to go back a little bit to those challenging negative attitudes and challenging your own as well. I think it's really important in teaching practice to give examples of life experiences, depending on the subject that you might be teaching. It's really important to draw upon your own experiences, highlight some of the mistakes. Doesn't make you a weak teacher, it makes you a stronger teacher by sharing your experiences and how you've reflected on that and how you've moved forward. And also thinking about opportunities to share experiences throughout the day and explore different concepts and fairness, tolerance, and forgiveness. And how we do that, I think that's probably the most important thing within that, is how we challenge those negative attitudes. And are we giving some fairness to everybody, but also making sure that you are calling out negative attitudes in a compassionate way? And we'll explore that a little bit more as we go on. So what we are going to do straight away is look at the definitions, because I think sometimes we do need to return to these definitions, because EDI is something that we've turned into an acronym, and so it just becomes something that rolls off the tongue and something that we say, oh, equality, diversity, inclusion, and just sort of group it all together. So I think it's really, really important to return to some of those definitions. So we're starting here with equality. Equality means each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. Equity recognises that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. We often see images like the one you have on the screen that support our understanding in a visual format. When we get to know the students that we are teaching, we can further understand their needs. And we do this through actively listening and connecting. So as you can see here, equality would be everybody having the same thing. Equity would be everybody having what they needed. This is a really, really important image, and there's lots of different ones of these around. And lots of ones that you can perhaps have in the classroom, perhaps talk to the children and young people about. One of the things I talk about with my own children, and something that really struck a chord with my youngest child, she was complaining to me about how I was treating her sister differently. And I can't actually remember what it was about now, but I said to her, if you had fallen over and hurt your knee, and I gave you a plaster for your knee, and then your sister fell over and hurt her elbow, but I gave her a plaster for her knee, would that be fair? And she said, no, of course it wouldn't. She doesn't need a plaster for her knee. She needs a plaster for her elbow. I said, so you're getting different things, but you're getting what you need. And that sort of really struck a chord with her, because straight away she was like, oh, okay. So we're having different things, but you're giving us the same attention. You're giving us the same compassion. You're giving us the same, the equity, aren't you? You're giving us equal attention and concern, but not necessarily exactly the same thing. So there's different ways in which that can be supported with colleagues, but with children and young people as well. The next definition we'll have a look at, and please do chat to me in the chat box if you've got any comments as we go along. The next definition is diversity. So diversity is what makes us all unique and includes recognising people for who they are. This includes valuing and respecting those characteristics without prejudice. The students have this role model to them, hopefully, and often they will come to us with preconceptions of different characteristics, as well as self-fulfilling prophecies. It's important that they see that they're welcomed, accepted, and valued. This in itself can be empowering and go a long way in making a difference to their self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-worth. And we need to go back and think about those 9 characteristics and how we can really make a difference to their self-confidence, self-esteem, and self-worth, depending on where you are and where you work and the age group of the children that you work, children, young people that you work with, will mean that those children have had so many different experiences before they came to you. And so we need to bear that in mind when they come into the room. And I always say, lead with kindness and compassion, and then everything else hopefully will fall into place. And the final definition we're just going to look at is inclusion. And inclusion means ensuring that everyone is included in education and that we make reasonable adjustments to do so. This could include adaptations, such as if a student has dyslexia, allowing them to listen to an audiobook when doing whole class reading. It could be accessibility within the classroom layout. My mentee, I'm a mentor for a girl who is 18 and she has autism. And I asked her about inclusion, and I asked her about her experience in education and her experience with, in particular, inclusion in education. And one of the things she said, which really resonated, was that all she really craves is a little bit of kindness and understanding. So, for example, this is the example she gave me, that she'd had one teacher who would recognise that if she had a handout to support her learning that day and it was creased, or there was a fold at the top of her piece of paper, or it wasn't completely flat, she had a teacher who would give that out and not even consider that that would affect her in any way whatsoever. And has actually said to her, oh, just get over it. And she said then she met a teacher who really, really understood that that creased piece of paper, that folded edge, could have changed her whole day, ruined her whole day. And so he would make sure that she had that flat piece of paper, so something so small, but something that could really impact her whole day. And again, it's thinking about those little things, and sometimes it's those small changes that make the biggest difference. So some reflective questions that we could consider are, is the classroom set up in a way that allows every student to access it? Is the lesson inclusive of all of the students in the class? Are you using a variety of teaching methods? By reflecting on each session and in the moment, we can identify areas for improvement and ensure that every person is seen. And that's a powerful statement. Every person is seen. Every person has a sense of belonging. So on that note, we're going to watch a video clip, and I'm going to watch it along with you and just mute myself. So I think you can still hear it if I mute myself. Here we go. Let's take a look. Okay, even if you couldn't hear the audio for that one, it's a really nice visual representation of everything that we've discussed about the definitions. So I really wanted to share that with you. I've put the link in the chat box as well so that you can use that in the classroom. And I just wanted to share a quote with you following that as well, is that, You may not always see the results of your kindness, but every bit of positive energy you contribute to the world makes it a better place for all of us. And I do think that all of this really does come from a place of kindness and compassion. So moving on to the Education Inspection Framework. The EIF promises to advance equality of opportunity for all learners. Equality and diversity is a key theme for Ofsted inspectors when assessing how prejudice and discriminatory behaviour is addressed in education institutions. It includes four key judgment areas for all education remits. That's the quality of education, behaviour and attitudes, personal development, and leadership and management. The provider prepares learners for life in modern Britain by equipping them to be responsible, respectful, active citizens who contribute positively to society, developing their understanding of fundamental British values, developing their understanding and appreciation of diversity, and celebrating what we have in common, and promoting respect for the different protected characteristics as defined in law. So let's break that down a little bit. So equipping them to be responsible, respectful, active citizens who contribute positively to society. And if you've got any ideas about how we can do that, please share them with us and share with everybody else for best practice. Develop their understanding of fundamental British values, and one of the core British values is respect for each other, isn't it? Develop their understanding and appreciation of diversity. You know, how are we doing that in your classroom? How are we embedding that in your workplace? And also celebrating what we have in common, but promoting respect for the different protected characteristics. So let's have a look a little bit further about how we can embed all of this into practice. Everything we've talked about so far. So never ignore hateful remarks. Hopefully we're never making them, but if we do hear colleagues or learners or our students or the children or whoever you're working with, never ignore those hateful remarks. That is sending a message to say it's okay for you to say hateful remarks. So make sure that we never ignore them. Connect with students outside of the classroom, meaning that we find out who they are. We created an attachment with them. We create a relationship with them. We understand who they are as a person. Make a comfortable, welcoming environment for everyone. That's quite a difficult thing to do. Many years ago, that's what I wrote my dissertation on. It was about how I made people feel when they came in a room into my classroom, and how that impacted their participation in the classroom. And it made a massive difference. If I was doing a one-off day where because I used to do a lot of CPD training, and people would walk into the classroom and they'd had a long journey, or they didn't like coming into a classroom of people they didn't know, or something had happened at home, or they didn't feel particularly happy that day, or many, many reasons that they didn't really want to be there. Sometimes, they were on a training course that their manager had sent them on and they didn't really want to be there. And the most important part for me was about making sure that they walked into the room, they felt comfortable there, it was welcoming, and that they could be themselves. And the way that I used to do that was just say hello to every single person that came in, but also then strike up a conversation, go over to them and have a chat with them. If they came in late, said to them, go and get a drink, make sure you're comfortable before you start. Still welcome them with the same smiley face and welcoming environment. Make sure they were pulled into conversations that were already happening and not made to feel uncomfortable for being there late. And that made a difference to answering questions throughout the session, the way that they engaged with each other, and then most importantly, how they walked away knowing some of the things that I'd talked about in the session because they felt comfortable to listen. So never underestimate that making a comfortable environment, because that really is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're not sure what to say or do, pause and find out. As we said at the start, it's okay to make mistakes as long as we learn from them. So if you're not sure what to say or do because a hateful remark has just happened and you're not quite sure how to deal with it or what to say, then make sure you pause, go and find out, or find out for the next day or whenever you're going to address that situation. As well, when you get questions that may be a little bit more difficult than usual, then pause and find out the right answer and be honest with the students and the young people that you're working with to say, okay, you know what, I don't know the answer to that question right now, but I am going to go and find out. Listen and pay attention to distress and other emotions. And there's lots and lots of different ways that we can do that, particularly paying attention to well-being and again to that relationship that you're building. Recognize your own biases. We all have them. And when we recognize them, we can almost work against them to be a better teacher, to be a better role model. Try to use positive language as much as you possibly can. And be kind to yourself when you get things wrong and learn from those mistakes, as we've said a couple of times now. Prepare, prepare, prepare. How are we making sure that our sessions have equality, diversity and inclusion embedded in everything that we do? And also continue learning. Keep learning, keep educating yourselves about all of the different things that are included in equality, diversity and inclusion. Okay, so please do chat with me in the chat box if you've got anything that you want to comment on or anything that you're doing right now or any experiences that you might want to share. So let's talk about empowerment. When we are curious, we are intrinsically motivated. When we are learning through our passions, we go deep into the adventure. When we have purpose, we keep going, even when it gets tough. And we have to fail in order to achieve success. And that comes from Lights On to Learning by Julia Black, which I really urge everybody to go and have a look at. It's so important to keep exuberant learning alive, and people can only do this when they feel safe, secure, soothed, and seen. As the teachers in the students' lives, it's our responsibility to keep the lights on to learning, and that is all about connection. I'm going to move on slightly now to bullying. I don't think we really can talk about EDI without looking at bullying, because it has a devastating effect on children. And it's not only the child being bullied who is affected. Bullying is a cycle that affects everyone involved, from the bully or themselves. And by effectively explaining the negative effects of bullying to children, educators and parents, we can help to break the cycle. Rosie Dutton, who is a Relaxed Kids coach, brought two identical looking apples into her class and dropped one on the floor. She then decided she didn't like it because it was disgusting and a horrible colour, and the stem was just too short. Her students thought she was crazy, but she passed it around the class and the children derided the poor price of fruit, saying, "You're a smelly apple. I don't even know why you exist. You've probably got worms inside you," and so forth. Then Dutton brought out the other apple and decided that it was wonderful. She asked the children to say kind words to it, such as, "You're a lovely apple. Your skin is beautiful. What a beautiful colour you are." She then held up both apples, showing that on the outside they both looked the same. Then she cut the apples open. The apple we'd been kind to was clear, fresh and juicy inside. The apple we'd said unkind words to was bruised and all mushy inside. After the big reveal, Dutton saw the light bulbs go off in her students' heads. They really got it. What we saw inside that apple, the bruises, the mush, and the broken bits, is what was happening inside every one of us when someone mistreats us with their words or actions. She then told the students about a time when her feelings were hurt by someone. She looked fine on the outside, but on the inside, someone had caused me a lot of pain with their words, and I was hurting, she tells them. This is a great way of illustrating how difficult it is to deal with discrimination and how it can affect your learning too. And this is a very simple way of explaining that. But there are also lots and lots of videos that you can find to demonstrate some of the damage that discrimination can really cause. So one of the last things I would like to share with you is this quote. Be the change that you want to see in the world. All of the things that we've discussed throughout this webinar is a very basic outline of what needs to be done. But thinking about all these things collectively can have an impact and change how someone views themselves and others. So I want you to also consider some of these reflective questions again. Have you avoided the use of stereotypes in examples and resources? Do your resources have multicultural themes? Do all students have equal access to opportunities and participation? Are your resources adapted in large print, braille, audio where necessary? Do you actively create an all-inclusive culture for staff and for students? Do you actively promote multiculturalism in your lessons? Do you use a variety of teaching methods? Do you use a variety of assessment methods where possible? Is support immediately available to students who need it? So there's quite a lot of questions there to think about your practice and to think about whether we're really embedding equality, diversity, and inclusion, the real definitions of those words, and whether we're really using them within our teaching planning, within our teaching delivery, and within our teaching assessments. We have some useful tools and guidance to support you here. So we've got the Education Inspection Framework. It's always good to have a look at what Ofsted are looking for when it comes to equality, diversity and inclusion, but also remember that that really is a guide for you and shouldn't be telling you exactly what to do. There's a great read and the voice for secondary education. There's a great read within the Equality Act. There's also the Global Gender Gap Report, which is an interesting read. And then we've also got Hashi Mohammed, who has got an absolutely brilliant journey that he shares with lots of different people and has some really positive messages to take away. So we come back to our reflective poll of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident do you now feel with equality, diversity and inclusion? And we do bear in mind here that even if you've only taken one thing away from today's session, that information and learning will continue to grow and develop. And some of these things that we have discussed will be things that you return to and have like. Okay, and just to remind ourselves why we were here in the first place, what our intentions were. Fully embrace equality, diversity and inclusion by returning to those terms and returning to those definitions, and also thinking and reflecting throughout the session about how we might embed that into practice. I feel that we've achieved all of our intentions today, but as this is a collaborative goal, we can reflect on those intentions and decide ourselves whether they have been achieved, and use the further guided resources to support in your own learning as well. What you will find is we have more of these safeguarding bite sizes and EDI. I know this is an EDI bite size, but we've also got lots of safeguarding ones coming up. So we have child protection and e-safety. We've got child on child abuse. We've got child abuse linked to faith or belief. We have wider forms of child abuse, so that's looking at things like FGM and child sexual exploitation and lots of other areas. We have prevent duty and radicalisation, domestic abuse and county lines, all of which were very, very popular last academic year, and we are rerunning all of those, and you can find all the information and registration details on the events page on. So that just leaves me to say thank you, and if you have got any questions, please pop them in the chat box. And if you have got any further questions after today's session, because sometimes it's when you've digested it all that you can you come up with some questions, you can always email myself or Kelly. But thank you for joining us today in today's session, and we hope to see you on the other sessions going forward. Please don't hesitate to contact myself or Kelly with any training ideas for future reference and any support. Thank you, everyone.